Hey, Kat.
Hey.
You're on.
Okay.
People are coming in.
Okay. Do you want to give it a few minutes or do we want to? Okay.
Whatever you would like. Probably
I
maybe
can't.
give it.
Okay, because I can't see people. Oh, okay, now I do see attendees. I see it increasing.
Yeah, that participant number is going up. So welcome, everyone.
How can you see them?
So if you look at it, like
Oh,
if you
I
click on the
see.
participant, yeah,
I
it
see
took me a
40.
minute. I'm like,
It's like 47 right now. I see where you are. I'm learning something new today.
you and I both. I did not know that either. It's kind of cool.
It is. 48. Hello, everybody.
Okay, so Tracy, did you see the captioner? Can you assign?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. I'm going to do that and I'm going to mute.
Then I see. And I also see there's a question about the captioning. We are working on that right now. Hello, everyone. So once we get the captioning figured out, I will just begin with like the introductions as everyone's joining, just to kind of give you a heads up of what we're doing.
And we should be working.
Okay, so then is that the thumbs up to start?
I'm not seeing any captioning yet or an option to request captioning.
I'm not. Oh, she's going to test it. And then she said to let us know if we see it. So if you see it?
Well, there is now the show caption option so we can view.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to view captions, but nothing is yet being shown.
I see test.
That's what we should see. So then we're great and we can start. Because that's what it would be. It'd be I see test.
Okay, awesome. So
She
I
says
will
go.
I will start. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So welcome to the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. I'm Katerina Plack, and I'm honored you are here for this breakout presentation, Disability Justice and Voting Rights Panel. I am an African-American female. I'm wearing a black shirt and I have my hair in a ponytail. I will be providing a brief introduction about information that will be useful to know. I would like to start by saying we are providing live captioning CART services, which are available by clicking the caption icon. The presentation is being recorded and will be available on our conference website soon. Next, I would like to recognize the land that we are on with a land acknowledgement. On behalf of the Planning Committee for the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference, I would like you to join me in acknowledging that our University of Wisconsin-Madison campus here on the shores of Wankeshanak-Ikla or Lake Mendota resides within the sacred homeland of Ho-Chunk people, a place they call Dejo or Four Lakes. As the reach of the university extends to the far corners of our state, we also respectfully recognize the inherent sovereignty of the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. Whether you are watching this from the land of the 12 First Nations or you are more distant, we encourage you to learn about the history of the history of the land you are on. As social workers, we have a duty to look critically at the role our profession has played in the attempt, cultural genocide, and destruction of Indigenous families, such as was the aim of boarding schools in the state and across the continent. This conference is rooted in critical reflection on our work as social workers. Our goal is to bring clarity about the past, but also to challenge and inspire us all to move into action in our communities once this conference is over. We hope this conference provides a space for critical reflection, humility, and openness, which will allow us all to reflect, to hear and tell truths, and move towards action and transformation to support Indigenous rights, cultural equity, and racial equity. We acknowledge, with acknowledgement and gratitude, we move forward today in our journey. So before we introduce our speakers, there's a few things that I also want to mention. To access this presentation, you will be required to provide your name and email. This will allow us to log our attendees and email you information on CEUs for the presentation, which will also be distributed via email at a later date. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted. There will also be a question and answer feature where you can submit questions for presenters. Please know that due to the large volume of attendees, we are not able to get all questions submitted. Please refer to the conference website and event page for logistics and CEU information. I'm going to now present a quick, brief bio, and the presenters will be able to add more information as they are presenting their information. So we have 4 people that are joining us today. The first person is Barbara Beckert, who is the Director of External Advocacy for Disability Rights, Wisconsin, the federally mandated protection and advocacy system for Wisconsin. Barbara leads DRW's voting access activities to protect the voting rights of people with disabilities. She also co-leads the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition in partnership with Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disability. Next is Anita Johnson, whose bio is available on the School of Social Work website so that you can learn more about some of the things that she's involved in, and she'll also explain more about what she does. Next is Cindy Bentley, who is the Executive Director of People's First Wisconsin and one of Wisconsin's most inspirational leaders and activists. Born with intellectual disability as a result of fetal alcohol syndrome, Cindy Bentley spent much of her childhood at the Southern Wisconsin Center for Developmentally Disabled. And finally, we have David Carlson, who is the founder and co-founder of We Adapt, a peer-supported and mentorship business. The organization serves over 200 participants, youth, and adults in the western region of Wisconsin. David is also the co-founder and owner of Next Generation Properties, LLC, a property business that collaborates with We Adapt. So just there will be some Q&As within the questions and section so that if you guys have any questions, they'll have a brief description of the answers to some of these questions that are commonly asked. Now I will turn it over to our speakers, and I will be muted, but I will also be sharing presentations as they present their presentations.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'm Barbara Beckert. I am a white woman with dark hair wearing purple, and I have a Zoom background that says disability rights are civil rights. So it's really an honor to be here today. This has been a phenomenal conference. I attended the opening session last week, and really, even as someone who's worked in the disability rights movement for a lot of years, felt that I learned so much and gave me a lot to think about. And it's also great to be here with an incredible panel of partners and advocates today for a really important conversation. I think it's so important that we're talking about disability justice and voting rights with you today in advance of what is really a historic election in Wisconsin, because on February 21st and April 4th, we are going to be voting for an open seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and whoever is elected will be making very important decisions that will impact all of our rights, but in particular, impact the rights of many people with disabilities. And it's a closely divided court, so this could change what the outcome of those decisions is. So make sure you're ready to vote. Let's bring up the PowerPoint and we can start our conversation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start out today by giving you some background for the conversation we'll have today. So I'll talk a little bit about the disability vote, historical barriers, new barriers that we've unfortunately been seeing in Wisconsin, strategies to protect and defend voting rights, and how you can be an ally. Next slide. So as mentioned, I'm with Disability Rights Wisconsin. Part of our charge as the protection and advocacy system is to protect the voting rights of people with disabilities. I just wanted to note that that is actually required by federal law. It's in the Help America Vote Act, and that is because Congress, which has a hard time agreeing on things, did agree that people with disabilities historically have been discriminated against and faced barriers to voting. So that intersection with racial injustice and disability injustice, really, I think voting rights is an area where we see that so much. As part of our work, we do have a hotline. We're available year round. So we invite you, give us a call or refer people, 844-347-8683, and happy to help with any of the issues that folks may be seeing. Next slide. One of the strategies that we really rely on to have a greater impact, because we're a small agency, is to do coalition work. So we coordinate the Disability Vote Coalition. The others on the panel today are all involved in different ways with the Disability Vote Coalition, and that's what we're all about. Partnership, allies, working with groups like Souls to the Polls, League of Women Voters, People First Wisconsin, We Adapt, and many others. That's how we can broaden our impact to work together to protect the rights of people with disabilities and ensure that they know and assert their rights. So join us. Our website, disabilityvote.org, has a lot of information. We invite you to check it out. Next slide. This is just, sometimes it's nice to have a picture. This is just a recent event at which a lot of our coalition members were in attendance, and that was at an effort to get together and to rev up the disability vote. So again, we invite you to join us and be an ally. Next slide. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about what is the disability vote, because it's a much more significant number of people than many realize. The American Association for People with Disabilities said that in the November 2020 election, and that's a presidential election, so that's why we look at that, almost a quarter, 23% of the voters had some kind of disability. If you look at data from the CDC, they estimate that 1 in 4 adults, 26%, have some type of disability. And Black Americans have the highest percentage of disability of any racial or ethnic group. When people say disability, they often think of the universal symbol of disability, a wheelchair, but it's a much broader and more diverse group. So includes people with sensory disabilities, blind, low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, intellectual and developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health, complex medical needs, and chronic health conditions. In addition, many older adults might not think of themselves as a person with a disability, but they have disabilities acquired through aging. So any one of us, if we live long enough, is going to be affected by disability. So that's why having accessible inclusions is something that we should all be concerned about. Because of the barriers we'll talk about today, people with disabilities are underrepresented at the polls. Rutgers has a think tank that does analysis of this, and they think there's an 11.4% gap in terms of participation among people with disabilities. So our goal is to ensure that as many people as possible have the opportunity to participate in our democracy and vote. Next slide. I'll do a quick run through of some of the historical barriers. Accessibility concerns. My agency, DOW, goes out to polling places on election day, and we assess them for accessibility on behalf of the Wisconsin Election Commission. Many polling places are accessible, but we also see some very serious concerns. Wisconsin has 3,000 polling places, so it's a lot of territory to cover. We need to do better. Lack of photo ID. Wisconsin has one of the most restrictive photo ID laws in the country, and that affects a lot of populations, people of color, people with disabilities. We have a high percentage of non-drivers in the disability community, and in Wisconsin, 31% of people do not drive. So we don't have that driver's license. So that can be a barrier to voting. Lack of transportation. If you don't have the driver's license, you can get a photo ID for voting at the DMV, but not having transportation can make it difficult for you to get there. Failure to provide accommodations. There are a lot of protections for voting rights in federal and state law, but often they are not enforced. Limited access to the internet. That can be a particular barrier in rural areas. Housing insecurity. We'll hear more about that later from David, but for individuals who have housing insecurity or live in a group home or institutional setting, it can be even more difficult for them to vote because they may not have a permanent address or may have difficulty proving residency. Lack of training for poll workers. Confusion about voting rights, especially for people under guardianship and people with criminal convictions. And finally, stigma and discrimination. So that's a long list, but we have more. Next slide. Unfortunately, since the 2020 election, there were a lot of unproven allegations about fraud occurring in that election, and that has led to efforts both in the courts and by our legislature that have made it more difficult to vote. So many different elections focused on and attacked the voting rights of people with disabilities, people in nursing homes, under guardianship, indefinitely confined voters. We've had a lot of attacks on the integrity of election officials. There have been frequent changes. Last year in 2022, a big election year, some of the laws that affected the rights of people with disabilities were different for every election. It's confusing for the voters as well as for election officials, and it disenfranchises people. We saw many new bills, most of which were vetoed by Governor Evers, that would have made it more difficult for people with disabilities to vote. And then litigation, elimination of drop boxes, restrictions of ballot return assistance, and restricting clerks from taking common sense action to provide missing information on the address on the certificate envelope for absentee voters. Next slide. So what are our strategies? What can we do to protect and defend voting rights? Next slide. One of our big focuses is education and outreach. And that's an area where we would love to partner with any of you. As social workers, you may be in a position where you can host a presentation or we can provide you with resources. So give us a call, we would love to partner. Next slide. So the training and outreach that we do is multifaceted. One thing we really stress is know your rights. So many people are not aware of their right to disability-related accommodations. For example, if you're at your polling place and you cannot complete your own ballot because of disability, you are entitled to have a person of your choice or a poll worker assist you with completing that. But we get calls from people who are denied that right. So more education is needed. Guardianship and voting rights. I'll talk more about that later, but that's an area where there's a lot of confusion. Voting rights of people with criminal convictions. Unfortunately, Wisconsin imprisons far too many people. A high percentage of them are people with mental illness or another disability. And when they come out of prison, they may not have the right to vote for some time, and they may be fearful of voting when that right is restored because they're unsure of their right to vote. We've got to stop our policies of disenfranchising such a significant part of our population. Voting rights of care facility residents, the rights of people who live in a nursing home or group home to vote can be very, can have a lot of barriers. We do a lot of collaboration with our allies, as I mentioned before, and we also partner with the Election Commission to provide training for clerks. We have 1,850 clerks in Wisconsin, so quite a few. They are the front line of voting. They need to be trained on accessibility and accommodations. Next slide. Guardianship and voting rights. So as social workers, I want to make sure that you know that in Wisconsin, a person under guardianship retains the right to vote unless the court expressly takes that away. Often election officials, family members, or guardians think that they have the right to take away someone's voting privileges. No, only the court can make that decision. People often don't know if they have the right to vote. So I just mentioned here the form that is recorded on. And people can request a copy of that form from the probate court in their county. It will have a box checked if the person lost the right to vote. And if they did lose that right, all is not lost. They can petition the court to restore their right to vote. And we have some good guides. Next slide. Sorry, I think I'm losing my voice here. So what are some other strategies? One of the most important principles we believe in is nothing about us without us, that it is important that the voices of people with disabilities who are impacted by these restrictions be front and center in our advocacy work. So speaking at hearings, press events, letters to the editor have all been important in having people with disabilities share how these barriers impact their voting rights. Earned media, we've had a lot of coverage and Cindy's been a part of that. She's often spoken out on voting rights, and Anita as well, as you'll hear later. Surveys, social media, we invite you to check out the Disability Vote Coalition Facebook page. And our agency provides support. We provide legislative analysis and advocacy training for the self-advocates. Next slide. Here are a couple of pictures. On the picture on the left, we have a voter who is blind and uses the accessible voting equipment that's required to be at every polling place to vote privately and independently. So she's doing a demonstration here for the media. Media is an important tool in our toolbox to help provide more education. And then on the right, we have some of the voters in one of the lawsuits I'll be talking about who spoke at our press event along with Mayor Johnson. Next slide. Testifying at legislative hearings, here we were able to have an ASL interpreter at this hearing. You know, sometimes not all legislators are supportive, but this one was great, this legislator, because we were able to do a virtual hearing so people with disabilities around the state could participate. Next slide. A lot of coalition work. As I've mentioned, I won't go through the list, but again, invite any of you to join. Next slide. Collaboration and with reports. This was a report that we worked on about the barriers in Wisconsin with photo ID, our photo ID law, and the need to increase access to DMV services. So doing a report can be a good way to give visibility to an issue and to advance change. Next slide. Litigation. Next slide. A very important lawsuit that our agency, Disability Rights Wisconsin, was a plaintiff in last year is called Tigan v. Weck. This was a case that the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty brought in Waukesha County to try and eliminate the use of drop boxes to collect absentee ballots and to require voters using absentee ballots to personally hand over their ballots to their clerk if they are not using the mail to return them, so that they could not have someone else assist them with either mailing or returning their ballot. This went through all of the courts, circuit court, which unfortunately did not find on behalf of voters in our state and agreed with these restrictions. It went to the Court of Appeals where there was a stay so that the restrictions did not move forward for the February election last year. And then it went to our state Supreme Court. We were very disappointed with the 4-3 decision there. They did not address the issue of assistance with mailing a ballot, and they did not respond directly to the protections in federal law for voters with a disability. So that meant last year, if you were a voter who was paralyzed or did not have hands, and you needed assistance from someone else to put your ballot in the mailbox, that was a crime in Wisconsin for much of last year, in spite of the fact that federal law gives people the right to have assistance. Next slide. Here's a report that we put together with different voters who were impacted by this restriction, sharing their story and saying how outraged they were by these new barriers. Next slide. And then finally, we were very fortunate that Law Forward, who represented us in this litigation, did not stop there. They went to federal court, and we had a great ruling in August of 2022 from Judge Peterson, which indicated that any Wisconsin voter who requires assistance with mailing or delivering their absentee ballot to the clerk because of a disability must be permitted to receive such assistance by a person of their choice other than their employer or union representative. And I am sorry to tell you that even though we had that good ruling from Judge Peterson, and clerks are supposed to follow federal law, just this week I heard from 2 voters who received mailings from their clerks saying that only the voter can return their ballot. So the battle continues for the rights of people with disabilities. Next slide. In our PowerPoint, we have a number of recommendations for policymakers, and we don't have time to discuss them right now. I want to make sure you get to hear from each of our amazing panel members, but I'm just going to point out that these are here because one of the ways you can be an ally on voting rights is by talking with your legislator and asking them to pass proposals that will support more accessible, inclusive elections. You can just go through a couple more slides here. I want to wrap up so we can get to Anita. Next one, please. So again, we ask you to be an ally and partner with us, support others to register to vote and know their rights. If a voter with a disability is experiencing barriers, refer them to our hotline. Ask to use the accessible voting machine at your polling place. That helps increase the visibility and awareness of that machine. And honestly, it can make your voting experience more accessible, even if you don't have a disability. Ask your legislators to support accessible voting. Hold accessible events like this one, where captioning is available and people who need ASL interpreters can request them. And check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Finally, our website, disabilityvote.org. So I am going to ask you at this point to take down the PowerPoint. I know that we've got more information and resources here for you, but the PowerPoint is posted, and I want to make sure that we have time to hear from all of our panelists. So thanks for the chance to share a perspective on disability justice and voting rights. And I am pleased to turn it over now to Anita Johnson, who has been an incredible partner in this work. Take it away, Anita.
Thank you so much, Barbara. My name is Anita Johnson. I work for Souls to the Polls as their outreach and I want to say disability because this is what I'm doing, an educational specialist. I am wearing a dark brown jacket with a mock turtleneck sweater under it, and my hair is black. Next slide, please. Souls to the Polls mission statement, I think is important for me just to go over this briefly. Souls to the Polls Wisconsin is a nonprofit organization. We believe that voting is our collective power, a tool that we can use to build supportive communities. Since our founding in 2013, we have united Milwaukee faith leaders, and strengthen the voting power of the Black community. Since then, I'm going to make this smaller. We have built relationships across the state, expanding the block beyond Milwaukee. We know a strong voting bloc is a key to pressing state and local leaders on issues such as affordable housing, education, economic development, gun violence, and governmental transparency. Together, we are building a block of engaged community members in our mission to channel our faith and bring 100,000 souls to the polls. Next slide, please. We will have a brief discussion on Souls to the Polls campaign to unlock the ballot box and the impact of the voter ID law on people of color and people with disabilities. Next slide. In January 2022, the Supreme Court judge ruled that the absentee ballot could no longer be used in Wisconsin. Ballot drop boxes help ensure that voting is fair and accessible for all, regardless of race, class, disability, or identity. This law affected people with disabilities and senior citizens, and also people who relied on caregivers and relatives to place their ballots in the mailbox or return it to the clerk and put it in a secure ballot box. Next slide. Many voters with disability and older adults relied on the existence of a ballot drop box. Many relied on a friend, a family member, or a care provider to physically place this ballot in the mailbox or return it to the clerk or to a secure drop box. The elimination of a ballot drop box and no voter assistance made it difficult, if not impossible, for many disabled and elderly Wisconsin voters to return their ballots in the manner that they have become used to. Next slide. Souls to the Polls coordinated a rally and press conference with the NAACP Milwaukee and Madison, League of Women Voters, Madison, League of Progressive Seniors, Disability Rights Wisconsin, and others to go to Madison to call on the Wisconsin Supreme Court to allow both the drop boxes and voter assistance for anyone who needs it during the election. We met at the state capitol with our signs and held the press conference in the assembly parlor. It rained, so we were not able to have the rally outside. Our speakers from the disability community, Martha Chambers and Jenny Nugert, were very impressive as they spoke about how difficult it would be for them to take their absentee ballots to the mailbox or clerk's office and how this would physically stop them from voting. Next slide. This is the flyer that we created and sent out to everybody because we wanted everybody to come and be a part of this rally that we had in Madison. Next slide. And this is the participants of the press conference, and these are the signs that we created for this event. Next slide. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and Barbara has talked about this, the lawsuit that the disability rights fought to defend the drop box and voter assistance. This law still stands. We cannot use drop boxes for our absentee ballot. However, voter assistance can be allowed, but is not allowed to drop ballots into the mailbox. This is what the Wisconsin Supreme Court has done to our people with disabilities, people of color, and senior citizens. It is so important that we support one another and vote in this upcoming judicial race. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about photo ID. Next slide. Wisconsin citizens are at risk of losing their right to vote, either because they're among the hundreds of thousands without a current government-issued photo ID, or because they're confused and intimidated by the complicated voter ID laws. In Wisconsin, registering to vote is not enough to guarantee your vote will be counted. Next slide. The implementations of Wisconsin photo ID law led to barriers of the ballot for thousands of people, particularly people with disabilities, people of color, senior citizens, and students. I know that we think everyone has an ID. For many reasons, everyone does not have an ID. Some of those reasons include, as Barbara said, lack of transportation, limited DMV hours in some rural areas, ADA accessible transportation, non-drivers, and proper documentation. Next slide. Many people do not have all the necessary paperwork to get a state ID, such as a birth certificate, and they have to go through the IDPP process. This process will allow you to get a temporary receipt, which is good for 60 days. Again, this affects people of color, senior citizens, and people with disabilities. When the 60 days are up, the temporary voter has to go back to the DMV and renew their temporary ID. Most people who have a temporary ID to vote are not even aware that they need to go back to the DMV to renew their temporary IDs. By the time they are advised on what to do, they have moved. And they have to start the process all over again. This is intimidating and frustrating. And you must remember, if you're assisting someone in getting an ID and they don't have the proper documents and they get a temporary ID to vote, that they do have to go back within 60 days if they don't receive a state ID and renew that temporary ID so they can vote in the next election. Next slide. Things you need to know. Next slide. Now, I know everybody knows the acceptable Wisconsin photo IDs for voting, but you know what? Let's just go over this real quickly. You can use your driver's license. This is acceptable Wisconsin photo IDs for voting. You can use your driver's license, your state ID. If you have a passport and you want to use that, you can use that. If you have a tribal card, current or expired, you can use that. If you have a US military ID that is current, you can use that. If you have a Veterans Affairs ID that has not been expired, you can use that. Certificate of Naturalization, Wisconsin student voter ID, and there are some rulings with that, and the DMV receipt. Next slide. A driving receipt issued by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation is a DMV receipt. It's valid for 45 days. An identification receipt issued by DOT is valid for 30 days. A temporary identification card receipt issued by Department of Transportation through the identification petition process, IDPP, is valid for 60 days. The IDPP provides a process to get an ID to vote without a birth certificate, and it allows you a cost free fee for any documents that you may need to pay in obtaining other documents such as a state ID. Next slide. Photo ID there are exceptions and exemptions for everything. Photo ID is always required when voting at your polling place unless you are a confidential elector, such as a victim of domestic abuse, sexual violence, or stalking, have spiritual beliefs that prevent you from being photographed, in which case you can receive a state ID card without a photo at any DMV office. Next slide. Just a little bit, I don't know how much time I have left. Can somebody tell me? I want to talk a little bit about the absentee ballots. There are 3 types of absentee ballots. There's the in-person absentee ballot, that's early voting. In Milwaukee, we are in that process now for early voting. There's a temporary absentee ballot where you can, I'm going to be out of town on April 4th and I want to vote. I'll have them to send an absentee ballot to me after I make the request and send in my ID. And there is the permanent absentee ballot. A permanent absentee ballot does not require a photo ID. The witness signature on the absentee ballot certificate envelope satisfies Wisconsin photo ID for voting requirements. Permanent absentee ballot users are indefinitely confined voters because of age, physical illness, infirmity, or disability traveling to the polling place. You can be 20 years old with lupus and you don't know if you're going to be able to move from day to day. You can request a permanent absentee ballot. Next slide, please. Obtaining a free Wisconsin photo ID for voting. You must be a United States citizen, 18 years of age. When you go to the DMV and fill out your application, check ID for free. There's a long list of documents you can use, but most people will be fine with a certified United States birth certificate, a social security card, and proof of residence. Make sure you bring the originals or certified copies. Next slide, please. The form on the right is your identification card petition process. If you don't have an ID, bring any identity documentation you have to the DMV. Fill in the form, it's MV3004 and the MV312. You will get a photo ID document in the mail that you can use in time for voting. Next slide, please. These are my resources, and I have taken up enough time. I work with vote writers. Vote writers will help to pay for any birth certificates, social security cards, or anything that you need for documentation so you can get an ID. The one thing I really want to mention quickly, don't forget to get your real ID. When you go to the polls, when you go to the DMV and you're going to renew your driver's license or your state ID, please get the real ID. If you have already done this, then you need to go back and get the real ID. I believe that they're going to go into effect this year. Thank you.
Well, Anita, this is
Yes.
Barbara again. So grateful to you for providing such important information, and especially for highlighting vote writers. They do a great job for people who have barriers to getting a photo ID, and I've really appreciated the chance to work with them. I'm just reaching out to our moderator, Katerina.
Yes.
We had talked about after Anita's remarks about taking a 5-minute break, right? So I'm turning it over to you so you can kind of facilitate that process and we can tell
Yeah.
people when to come back and so on.
Yes, so we are going to take a brief break, everyone. Here, let me put my video on so that you can see me. So we're going to take a brief break, and as mentioned before, it'll be about 5 minutes. And so please take the time to stretch, do whatever you need to do during this break time, and we will start back up again at 12:52.
Anita, thank you so much. I
You're-
really appreciated your presentation. I know you have to leave, and so I just want to
Yes.
thank you.
I'm sorry that I had to rush through it so quickly, but you're very welcome.
You
It was-
covered a lot in the time, Anita. I was amazed how much you got through. So really grateful that you could be here on such a challenging day.
I am very honored that you asked me to do this, Barbara. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, it's always an honor to team up with you. Take
Okay.
care.
All righty.
Take good
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, hello everyone. It is 12:52, so please take the time, like next 15 seconds, to kind of get ready and back in place, and we will resume the presentation. I do notice there are a couple Q&As within the question and answer box, and it looks like we are all just working to kind of answer some of those questions, but for those that are joining us, if you have similar questions, it may be helpful to look at the Q&A portion of this presentation to answer some of these great questions that have already been asked.
60.
Okay, and so I'm going to resume the sharing of this presentation. Our next speaker is Cindy Bentley. I will be sharing some of their presentation at the beginning of this and presentation, and then they will continue with their speaking portion. So I will not be sharing throughout the whole entire presentation. So
And-
Cindy, yeah.
And just to kick off this portion of our panel, this is Barbara Beckert again, and Cindy and I are going to do this portion as a conversation. So Cindy, I'm really happy that we can be here today to have a conversation about voting rights and the important work that you do. So I wondered if you could start out by just introducing yourself, telling a little bit about yourself and about People First Wisconsin, and we can just kind of go through the pictures as you talk.
I'm Cindy Bentley. I'm the Executive Director of People First in Wisconsin. I'm African American, and I'm wearing a purple sweater, and I'm wearing a turtleneck with stripes, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Cindy. People First Wisconsin does such amazing work on disability rights for people around the state. Can you talk a little bit about your network of chapters? I see we've got a picture here to go with that.
Our chapters are, we had 17 chapters. We're down to about 12. That's because of the COVID-19. But our chapters, we talk a lot about voting, and I got more involved in voting last year.
Yeah, as you have a really interesting voting rights story, Cindy, because as a young woman, you were not able to vote because of a guardianship. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I had to have a guardian to get out of the state institution back when I was about 25 years old. So as I found out about voting, and so I asked my guardian if I could vote, and she said yes, but we had to go to the courthouse, our courthouse, talk to a judge. And the judge, asked me, that's how they treat people sometimes with disabilities. Asked me if I knew right from wrong. I don't know why that question came up, but the question I used, because I'm just kind of a rebel, is that I told them that if I ate 9 cookies, I knew right from wrong, and that's how this conversation started, and that's how I got my voting rights back too. You have to have a little humor in it. I don't know if the judge thought it was humorous, but he asked me the question and I answered to the best of my knowledge.
That's great. Well, I'm so glad, Cindy, that you were able to get your voting rights back, and now you're making a difference, helping to encourage and to support others to vote. Can you share a story about what you and People First Wisconsin are doing to support people with disabilities to vote, and also some of the difficulties you see people having?
Yes. So I've been our organization, I make sure my members are voting but also we explain to them, we have Barbara come to mostly every big meeting we have with people first, especially during the voting season, because people with disabilities, of course, are having a hard time. And a person over here on your right here in the picture, and then in the middle, right by me, I helped her and Barbara and all of us helped her get her rights back to vote. She also had a guardian, and her guardian said, no, you can't vote. Well, under the law, she could vote. So we made sure Jennifer could vote, and she was very happy. I make sure I have a letter that goes out every 2 weeks. Oh, what happened, Barbara? I was trying to.
No, you're doing great,
Oh,
Cindy. That was just,
okay.
we went through all the pictures, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So every 2 weeks, and I put in, I'm on them all the time. I say to my members, if you don't vote, you don't have a voice, and you can't complain. But there's some barriers to our members. First of all, ID, or we have some people that can't even reach the what do you call it, the drop box. And when they had that last year, I was so mad. And so, well, I'm glad Disability Rights was able to sue them, but also we have the rural areas. There's a transportation barrier in Milwaukee and outside of Milwaukee. And some people have to travel far just to get to the voting poll, especially if they're in a rural area. I think the biggest thing is the IDs, the transportation, and then of course, they came up with this crazy idea of the boxes, and I was not happy about that. And I tell so I try to fight every day for accessibility and everything I can, even for myself. Now I vote, and I vote absentee voting because when the botanic came up, COVID, I found out I could do absentee voting. And so I like it because I don't have to, they changed my poll, and it's in an area where it's hard to get to. Number one, you gotta walk 4 or 5 blocks longer from where I was actually, doing it. So my members have the same issues I have. I get it because I have a disability, and I want to do the best I can for my members. And thanks to Barbara, and I don't know, something just got me. I wasn't always paying attention to voting, but when I started working for People First in Wisconsin, I had to learn the rules and regulations of voting. And then I had to tell my members all the time, I call them. Our last big election last year, I was on the phone with all of them. Said, did you vote? Are you going? No, I didn't say, did you vote? Are you going to vote? I put it on I had it on our website, Facebook. We had it all over. So just keep reminding them, and then when I would have my letters, and I always say, I keep saying this all the time. So and they said, Cindy, why do you always say this? I says, well, I mean, what I mean is because I want you to vote. If you don't vote, you might as well not come, you can't complain. And so I want to make a difference. And second thing, I'm African American. I have a disability and I'm African American. I have 2 things, people don't think about. They think about my disability, but they don't think about I'm a minority. And another thing, minority people don't have the right to vote. And they try to stop people like myself that are more minority to vote. And I think it's wrong. And they continue to make it harder. And what I did is some education on it, is In the 1900s, women could not vote at all, no woman. And so I figured this too, I'm a woman and I'm gonna vote. But I also want to say to social workers, when you're talking to people with intellectual disability, talk to them about voting. Don't, how you say the word? Don't assume they don't know what voting is. I think what the problem is in this country is, or in this world, is because you've been diagnosed with a disability that we don't have a mind. Well, I have a mind. I don't know everything, and I have issues that I can't always, get out for myself. But I do know that if you ask a person with a disability, you may learn something. People with disabilities are smart. That's don't assume to look at a chart or wherever you're going to be a social worker at, or in a school. Oh, this is what they've been diagnosed with, autism or whatever. That doesn't mean they don't have a brain and they don't have so I'm saying to social workers, in my own words, I had lots of social workers and psychologists telling me what I wasn't going to be. And I remember at the discharge staffing, you're not going to amount to anything. You're going to live in a group home the rest of your life and work in a shelter workshop. B, I don't work in a shelter workshop. B, I don't live in a group home. I live in my own apartment with help, and going about my life the best I can. Being the executive director is a hard job for me. And I'm talking from my heart. I have all this, but I'm talking from my heart. This was just, so this, so I have everything in place for me to be the executive director. I didn't know I could be an executive director, but I have my office manager and people backing me like Barbara, the BP board, people that really love me, but also knew I could do this. And Special Olympics is the one that gave me my voice to begin with in leadership. I thank them for that. But I thank myself too for, I thank myself for doing some work with it too. It's not always been easy. I've been in my job 23 years and been a director for almost 8.5 years, almost 9. So I can be an executive director. I didn't know I could be an executive director. I thought you had to go to college. What I'm finding out about this is that advocacy is you advocate for yourself, you advocate for other people. You don't need a college degree for that. And I realize I'm not trying to pick on social workers or anything like that, but please believe in the people that you're going to serve. And I can't see you in the audience, but I realize that there are good social workers out there. Unfortunately, I had a lot of social workers that didn't believe anything in me. So that's okay. I had to learn to believe in myself and to love myself. And then I'm able to help other people. So I always say to my audience, it's not what's on the outside, it is what's in your heart. And I also want to say, I said Rose, let me see, I want to say one other thing.
And I have one question for you too, Cindy,
Okay.
before we.
As a black,
audience.
okay, as a black woman in the city of Milwaukee, I'm going to make a difference. I don't think you should go by the color of your skin. You should go by the person. Look at the person and treat me like a person. I know I'm an African-American person with a disability, but that's not what defines me who I am. And I want to say that, so yes, Barbara, I think I got everything. I just decided I like.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was amazing, Cindy. I'm glad that we'll have this recorded. There was a question from the audience
Yes,
that I thought would
please.
be great for you
Okay,
to answer.
sure.
So Amy says, thank you so much for all your work and leadership with People First Wisconsin. I work with families who have teens and young adults and are thinking about supportive decision-making and guardianship. Do you have any advice for what we can say to parents to encourage them to support their family members' right to vote? So great question to close us out here, and then we'll pass it on to David.
Yes, I think you need to talk to the person with the disability. And then also encourage their parents to let them be who they are. If they are capable of voting, they should be able to vote. They should not have anything stripped away from them. And by the way, last week I was at a conversation of transition students. And I went right up to them and I said, do you vote? And they're 19 years old and some were 18. And guess what? I got 3 or 4 of them, they're gonna vote in this election. And they're their own guardians. And I mean, they're capable of voting. They might need some help. I need help with my voting to make sure I'm doing it right. But this, you gotta do it kindly to the parents, because I think sometimes the parents don't think their son and daughter can vote or do anything. So as a social worker, you have to be sort of like, put yourself in a parent, if you're a parent, then you know what you would want for your son and daughter. So you would want the same thing for the person that you're trying to help. Guardianship was an important. When I was under guardianship, there was a lot of rules and regulations. It strips you of your voting, but it strips you of other things. And it really makes you say you're unconfident. I can't do everything, but I was so glad when I got my vote, not only my voting back, but my voice to make my own decision. I didn't have to have the guardian speaking for me. So I hope I said the right thing to you. Just be yourself as a social worker while you're in this field, I'm sure while you got in the social worker field to help people with and without disabilities. So thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. That was really
I hope I said
powerful.
everything right.
You shared so much great information. Yeah. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
for all your advocacy and for joining us on the panel.
I was kind of
today.
nervous, but I try to do the right thing.
That was great. And now we'll pass it on to David to close us out, and really grateful to have you here today, Cindy. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. Same to you.
Hi, my name is David Carlson. I am a Black male. I have a shaved head and a beard. I'm wearing a white shirt, and the background is basically just a white wall. I'm very bare. I don't have anything up on the wall right now. I go by my pronouns, he, him. And then just one thing that I would like to say before going into this, Cindy just touched on so many different aspects of what I was going to touch on. I just wanted to say I'm pretty much going to be piggybacking off a lot of that. And I think a main point is going to be the voice piece of that. And so as it is said in my biography, I am the founder and co-owner of CC We Adapt. It's a peer support and mentorship agency in Northwestern Wisconsin. And we serve over 200 participants in the region up here. We're in 22 counties. And in our service region, we have individuals that are in programming with Department of Health Services who have either a mental health need or a substance abuse need. And as anybody that comes from this type of background, which I'll get into mine, knows these aren't separate things. Oftentimes, these occurrences, mental health, substance abuse, developmental disability, trauma, all of these things intersect. And so I'm going to try to speak about them as much as possible at that intersection, because it's the same way that voting works, especially suppression and disenfranchisement for voters that whose identity falls in an intersection of all of these different identities. And so just a little bit about myself. I came from a lot of different traumas in my early childhood, a very unstable life up until 15 years old. I was adopted by family members that were a little bit estranged, and that's how I found my way to Wisconsin. I'm coming to you from Eau Claire, Wisconsin right now. I was adopted straight out of a juvenile facility in Minnesota, Hennepin County homeschool. And then I did high school at my sophomore through senior year at Rice Lake High School. After that, joined the military and did 2 tours of combat in Iraq. After my second tour, I came back and had some pretty substantial challenges. Not that I didn't have challenges in between. I had severe addiction to alcohol and any substances, mind-altering substances that I would even try. And so throughout the time of my service, I was able to kind of hold that off. After my second tour in Iraq, that became my way of coping with a lot of the challenges I was experiencing. And I really spiraled down pretty quickly. It turned out that I had mental health evaluations through the VA, the Veterans Healthcare Administration, and ended up, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and rated at 70% for service-connected disability. That rating came from, or that diagnosis was, I didn't acquire, or PTSD didn't just, it didn't happen to me in my adult years. It was exacerbated. So I most likely had PTSD from my youth, and then in my 2 tours in combat, it was exacerbated. And so I kind of came to a breaking point, is how I understand it, after my second tour. And so that led to homelessness for me. I also experienced homelessness in my youth prior to being incarcerated. I experienced homelessness then after my second tour in Iraq. I was in and out of the VA, out of different substance abuse, mental health treatment facilities, and then eventually incarcerated for just short of 5 years, which I was released my final time at the end of 2015, and haven't been incarcerated since. And so throughout that time, or since that time, I have been an advocate for individuals suffering from mental health and substance abuse challenges. I started out really advocating for soldiers, veterans who were coming back and didn't have the resources they needed to succeed. And then I just saw that my interest, or my effectiveness, I should say, lied more in working with youth. I kind of circled back to where all of it started for me, and I just found that I was able to connect with youth going through some of those same challenges in the same way that I had. And that's the area that I really, I dove into that area. When I started We Adapt, it was with an emphasis on working with youth who were in conditions, traumatic conditions, which eventually leads to mental health, disproportionately leads to negative mental health outcomes, health outcomes in general, and a lot of times that's accompanied by substance misuse. And so all of this background to say, I recently, I would say within the last 1.5 to 2 years, working as a organizer for the ACLU before I started We Adapt, realized that another intersection of all of this was disability rights. I think that this is around the period of time when I met Barbara Beckert, and I was introduced to a lot of what the disability rights organization was doing in Wisconsin, and just realized that a lot of all of this, everything that I had seen in incarceration, the things that I had seen both in jail and prison, also seen in the VA, and just in the community now, working as an advocate and also working in direct services with individuals, was that individuals with disabilities were also voiceless, and voiceless for a number of reasons, including myself. And so a purpose of We Adapt has been one, direct services. We work with individuals, youth and adults. You can't really work with youth in an effective manner if you're not also working with the adults that impact their lives. And so that has been a focus of ours. And what we have also become involved in is political advocacy. I am still on extended supervision until 2031. And so I'm not able to vote. A lot of the individuals that we hire are on different forms of probation or supervision, and they are unable to vote. And so our voice is left out of the political discourse. And the reason that is harmful for communities is, just as Cindy stated, is that if our voices, the individuals who have experienced walking through these different institutions, walking through life in the community, dealing with certain, whether it be trauma, whether it be developmental disability, whether it be other mental health, negative mental health outcomes, if we're not able to have our voice included in the political conversation, then any remedies, any solutions that are presented are most likely going to fall short. And that's what I think one of the root problems with a lot of the services that get rolled out for individuals like me, individuals that come from similar backgrounds as I do, why those services are not very effective. And this is something that we're trying to change at We Adapt. Since I still can't vote, what we do is we have a lot of discussions with individual elected officials in our area, municipally, at the county level and the state level sometimes, so that they do hear our voice. But ultimately, what we need to see is see elected officials working on legislation that will directly impact and open up resources so we can have more organizations like you see here, more organizations like We Adapt in direct services, because ultimately these organizations are made up of people who have had those experiences, and we're going to be the most effective at helping people out of those experiences, or at least supporting them through those experiences. And so it's really critical. And I think a lot of times there's a disconnect between what people see as issues in the community, whether it be homelessness, whether it be addiction, whether it be property crimes, whatever it may be, and then the exclusion of certain demographics of individuals from their voting rights or from voting and from the political conversation. Well, these two issues are one and the same. As long as you keep excluding the very individuals who have the answers that you're looking for, you aren't going to find the solutions to these challenges, and it's going to keep compounding. Another thing that I want to go into that is actionable now for us, coming up on the April 4th ballot, is going to be the bail amendment, the bail reform amendment that they want to add to the Wisconsin Constitution. That's going to be an amendment, if that's voted on in the public now, that is not something that the governor can veto. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up specifically, it circles back to incarceration. The numbers from, and this is a national organization, so I don't want to say that this is necessarily specific to Wisconsin, but I would say that anecdotally, I would say that this is accurate. An estimated 40.4% reported psychiatric disabilities of individuals who are incarcerated, and 56% reported a non-psychiatric disability. This is nationwide. And so that's an estimated 66% of incarcerated people were disabled. And so this is a large segment, just as Cindy had talked about the different barriers that get put up to voting. Well, here's another barrier, is if you're in county jail, for instance, you may be eligible to vote, but there may not be the procedures in place. There may not be the awareness, the things in place to give people awareness that they can vote while they're in jail. And so you have another segment of the population excluded from this political conversation. And so once you start adding up all of these segments of the population that are excluded, you end up with an aggregate that is almost a majority of this demographic of people who you need to have their voice included in this conversation. And that's problematic. Well, what does this have to do with the bail reform amendment that will be voted on April 4th? Well, the bail reform amendment, the definitions of violent crime, for instance, aren't very clear. They're not clear yet. And so what we're saying is we're going to have a massive influx of individuals remaining in jail. And we aren't going to have a massive influx of procedures, policies, protocols for individuals to demonstrate their vote or to access any of the resources they need to access to assist them while they have whatever disability that they have and are incarcerated. And so this is very problematic. It's something that I think that with We Adapt in the region of Wisconsin that we're in, we've showed what individuals with the kind of lived experience I've talked about, what we can do. We've added real value to the community. We bring in quite a bit of an additional amount of revenue into this community now. We provide jobs. We have 40 providers working in 22 counties in this region of Wisconsin. And this has been built out by people who have historically been excluded from the vote and excluded from all kinds of other forms of community engagement, whether that be employment, housing, or any other area. And so us showing this, just imagine if we relieved some of these barriers, or if we took down some of these barriers for more of the demographic that we've discussed here today to be able to access their right to vote. Imagine the changes that we could have on a large scale level throughout Wisconsin. And this is what we need to be talking about. We don't need to be considering a bail reform amendment that is completely reactionary because the news has hyped up a lot of stuff happening in the community at a time that is unprecedented. And now we want to circle back to mass incarceration, which we've already shown doesn't work, and it doesn't keep the public safe. And it has a disproportionate negative impact on people with disabilities, Black and brown people, and other people coming from marginalized populations. And so, I'll end there because I don't want to go too much further, and I want to make sure there's time for questions, but it's really a critical period in time. Again, we are in an unprecedented moment in time right now. The other business that was discussed that I co-own is Next Generation Properties. It's all, we deal with housing. We do affordable housing, and we use peer support in that housing to make sure individuals are successful in the housing context. That's something that doesn't really exist in the area of Wisconsin where I'm at. We have housing by itself if you can get into it, but then once you're into it, what's going to help you succeed in that housing when maybe you've had challenges before? And so we're really trying to pioneer new ways of dealing with these things. And if our voice was included at the political level, I believe this would be something that would be scaled much quicker rather than just happening in certain pockets throughout Wisconsin. And so I'll end there. I appreciate everybody's time. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone that has spoken today. A lot of knowledge has been shared, and I can see in some of the Q&As that a lot of people are very appreciative of each of these presentations. If there are any lingering questions, feel free to submit them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to those. There's 5 more minutes left, and so I'm going to finish off with some of like the closing, but we'll keep an eye on the Q&As too as we go through. So what I would like to first say is, in the Q&As, there are questions and answers provided about CEUs, feedback, and then the closing session today. So please look at those answers to those questions. And so again, I want to say many thanks to our presenters for sharing their time, expertise, and valuable information with us today. Thank you to everyone in attendance for being a part of this event and for your commitment and efforts to confront racial injustice. Please watch for an email with a link to complete an evaluation of today's conference, including this panel. Also, watch for a separate email regarding CEUs for those that have requested them when they register. We hope that you will join us for the closing plenary provided by Imani Barban of Crutches and Spice that will start at 2 p.m. So take a quick break and come back for more great content. Thank you. I'm going to quick look at the Q&As and see if there's anything else. Nope, there's just more praise because yes, today's presentation was excellent. And so thank you everyone again.
This is Barbara. I just wanted to take a minute to reinforce David's call to action. You know, I think we're going to see such important things on the ballot this April, and it's really discouraging to see how people in our justice system are being demonized, and we don't want to move in the direction of having more people, including people with disabilities, incarcerated. We want to move in the other direction and to have more support for prevention and for reentry services. So it's a really scary time, and it's a very important election. So just want to reinforce David's message about why it's so important to vote and talk to 3 people. Tell them what you heard today and spread the word.
And this is Cindy. We wrote something on David's behalf. 2 tours of duty in Iraq, and he cannot vote. This is wrong. Just so you know, this is wrong. We're on his side. So this
Thank you,
is
Cindy.
very wrong. You're welcome. Anytime we help each other.
Absolutely.
So we have about 3 minutes until we kind of close this out. I welcome you all again. Like I said, if you want to ask any questions, continue with praise, because like we said, these are great presentations and great calls to action for all of us that are sitting here wondering what we can do. I think that everyone provided great advice on how to make those actions possible.
I want to also thank the panelists. It was great. I learned so much, and I appreciate your dedication to this. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, if everyone who was here today goes out and makes a difference in terms of trying to support people to address barriers and to participate in our democracy by voting, then we can really move the needle. So thanks for the great conversation and all the questions, and so grateful to David and Cindy
Thank you.
for the work that they are doing on the front line here.
There's one question here. David, someone is wondering if you can repeat one more time the action item, the bail measure.
Mhm.
So there's going to be a bail reform amendment that the public will be on all the ballots that you'll be voting on. And that should be voted down for a variety of reasons, but it should be voted down because basically what it is asking is that if individuals have certain what they classify as violent crimes, that they're not eligible for signature bonds, which is a cashless bail. The reason that should be voted down is because it is really, when you say violent crime, there's a lot of things that they can put underneath that, all the way to teenagers that get into a fight with each other, siblings that got into a fight with each other. They haven't defined it well enough to say what they're actually saying violent crime is. And so what that's going to do is it's going to create more individuals that are being put on cash bond, staying in jail around the times of elections. There are not, the majority of Wisconsin jails do not have processes in place for individuals to demonstrate their right to vote, even though they're still eligible to vote. So that's one piece that is just not good, to keep people in jail unless they're not going to reappear before the court to be processed through whatever their charge was. That's the reason for bail, for cash bail. But another harmful piece of that is individuals with disabilities, whether that is a mental health or a psychiatric disability, or it is something other than a psychiatric disability, is there isn't care, there isn't treatment, there isn't resources in jail. So you're remaining in horrible conditions. Since COVID-19, you may be in a single cell, not released for 14 days before you go to the next transition, to the next unit, which may then be only, the nighttime spent in your cell. But imagine 2 weeks in a cell, 24 hours a day, every single day. Individuals that have, all kinds of different challenges, that's torture. And the Supreme Court has not ruled that is torture, but it is, in reality, that experiencing that is torture. And so that's what this bail reformed amendment is going to do if it is voted in on April 4th. And so the action item number one, the most immediate thing, is to vote no for that amendment.
Thank you for that information.
Yeah, that's a really powerful message, and one we need to get out into the community.
Yes, I tried to capture everything that you said, David. I didn't say it so perfectly, so I was typing really quickly just in case people want to look at some of the things that you just said about the action. But number one, vote no. So,
That's it. That's all you need is just vote no.
all right, awesome. We're gonna close this up, everyone. So take a break,
Thank
and
you.
then the last session begins at 2 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.